26 December 2004. It was the day geology committed genocide. For millions of people along the coastal regions of South and Southeast Asia, the morning had begun like any other passing day, a step closer to the end of the old year and the beginning of a new one. Very soon, though, both earth and ocean had conspired to take all of them to the very end of their world, initiating the greatest natural disaster in recent human history. First came a great quake that made the entire globe tremble. Next, tsunami waves several meters high that destroyed everything in their path, leaving thousands upon thousands dead across half a dozen countries. Men, women, children swept from their homes and swallowed by raging sea water. Homes, cars, and even a train plucked and tossed about like toys before being smashed to pieces.
Door het restaurant heen. Kijk dan door de... Hey. Kijk hier.
Most human societies cope with the loss of loved ones by drawing upon tradition and ritual to drown out their sorrows. The scale of this tragedy was such that made all conventional mourning meaningless, for no one knows where to begin or where to end. The killer waves ambushed and destroyed entire coastal communities, tore apart families, whimsically decimating a parent here, a child there, somebody's wife, husband, or sibling somewhere. There are countless tales of babies slipping from the hands of desperate mothers, husbands watching their wives, and children drown and children seeing parents washed away to their watery graves. Relief and rehabilitation activities for the people affected by tsunami were carried out by governments and hundreds of non-governmental organizations. Temporary shelters were constructed. Boats and nets were provided. Initiatives were taken to provide them secured life and livelihood. Counseling sessions, skill training, and various educational programs and orientations were offered to the affected with a view to face life with more confidence and faith. Around 150 days after the tsunami, humanitarian aid workers came together to review and reflect upon their interventions in tsunami-related activities. People's Health Movement organized a dialogue-cum-workshop in Chennai, South India on humanitarian aid, community empowerment, reflection on post-tsunami disaster response strategies on 8th and 9th April 2005, in which over 60 non-governmental organizations and funding agencies from around the world participated. They shared their experiences, charted the road ahead, and debated the role of aid workers during those 2 days. The aid workers were primarily representatives from India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, three of nations most affected by the tsunami. Also present were aid workers from dozens of countries like Nicaragua and Bangladesh who have learnt about disasters from painful encounters. Chennai Declaration is the document that contains some of these discussions and decisions, which was one of the outcome of this dialogue. It hurts that my mother is gone, says a young girl simply in one of Satya Sivaraman's short films that was screened during the conference. Many stories are of pain and grief, things that hurt, things that are simple. But many other stories aid workers shared at the consultation were like puzzles set by mysterious creatures to test the heroes of legends. In helping communities rebuild, should NGOs perpetuate the same inequalities or use these opportunities to change exploitative situations? Where does intervention end and where does intrusion begin? When should aid end? Diplomacy is sorely tested as aid workers try to rebuild in areas where the communities are at war with each other or the state is at war with its own people. Walls that tsunami cannot break. Since December 2004, stories of great generosity, courage, and love have warmed a world chilled from the apocalyptic wave. Aid workers from every nation affirmed that local communities, families, and friends have often played a sterling role in rescue and relief work. Ethnic and religious lines were crossed often to do so, especially in the first couple of weeks after the tsunami. But there are some walls that tsunamis cannot break. Vimal Nathan, director, NASA Bangalore, recounted the story of a fisherman's bitterness. I lost everything. I lost family members. I lost my boats and nets. I can learn to deal with this world. How can I deal with a world that buries my people with Dalits? In Aceh, Indonesia, the military have made it clear that aid workers are there on sufferance and no tsunami is to interfere with the army's daylight killings. Aid workers can either register a strong protest on the risk of being sent away from crucial work or close their eyes to human rights violations.
To ensure that the rehabilitation process of the post-tsunami is effective and sustainable, we have to make sure that the communities are the one who make decision and taking part in all the rehabilitation process. The role of the NGO is not to provide all the answer and resource for the community, but is aiming to facilitate free process so that the community are allowed to think by themselves, identify what exactly they want to do, and identify their own solution. Our role is to mobilize all resource, provide resource and facility for them so that they can conduct their own initiative.
Nothing to lose? Inequalities that existed before the disaster are magnified after the disaster. Women, the aged, children, and people with disabilities continue to be marginalized. An already hostile world becomes more complicated to navigate. The delegates talked of the widespread differences in aid allocation and distribution. Dr. Balaji Sampath of the Tamil Nadu Science Forum said with a still startled air, "There is no department to deal with the loss of livelihood of agricultural labor." In a country where 40% of the population is agricultural labor, the tremendous generosity and solidarity expressed by people the world over and the massive flow of assistance to the affected countries should have led to a process towards achieving a higher standard of living for affected people, said Sarath Fernando of Monla, Sri Lanka. The participants of the conference warmly agreed that the relief measures must not merely aim to restore the communities to their pre-tsunami condition. But one point of deeply troubling inequity was brought up by aid workers over and over again at the consultation. When thinking of how much money is allocated to tsunami relief, we need to remember that 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases every day, pointed out Dr. Unnikrishnan PV, Action Aid International. The tightrope of the mind. Aid workers declared that this was the first time that there had been such popular emphasis on psychosocial care. For the survivors of the tsunami, the landscape had been rendered unfamiliar and untrustworthy overnight. Psychosocial care would certainly be beneficial, but what would be the nature of this care? How would this fit into the culture of the survivor communities? Insights and debates were varied. Many agreed that psychosocial care should be planned for groups and communities and perhaps not individuals as in traditional Western psychotherapy. Beaches of discontent. In India, Sri Lanka and other nations, debates have been raging around the creation of buffer zones and coastal regulation zones. In the 2020 vision of hindsight, it seems obvious that people should not have been ever allowed to set up home and business on the beach. While conservators were referring to complex and long-term measures to protect the coastal environment, governments cheerfully latched on the idea of evicting people from beachfront real estate for their own safety. People who have lived on the coast for generations are now being told by governments across South Asia to move anywhere between 100 meters to 500 meters away from the sea. Even if one attributes solid gold intentions to the establishment, the fact remains that these countries do not have the land to relocate the displaced.
Sometimes it seems people are being displaced by these laws of 100 or 300 or 500 meter buffer zones. And I'm wondering about why this is that these buffer zones are being created. Is it so much in order to help the people not to be in a disaster area, or is it to create a beautiful beach so that tourist hotels can be placed just beyond the 500 meter zone and take advantage of the beautiful beach? Because I'm seeing that some people are being relocated many kilometers from where they've been living before, and this was not their desire. And often these are people who their livelihood depended on the informal economics of selling things or doing things in the city. And if they're displaced so many kilometers away, the money they'd have to pay in bus fare or other transportation would be eating up any small profit that they would get in order to live. So it's a very complex situation once again, where it's questionable whether the local people are being consulted about what they think is in their best interest.
The question of housing remains complicated. Aid workers recount with irony that they were told there is a time and place for consulting people, and right now isn't the time. So people are stuck in asbestos-topped ovens in tropical weather. In some places, it has been the fear of fire or the sea that led to the popular thatched roof houses being replaced. But if people are not using them, it becomes clear that here is another instance of good intentions being just not enough. On the 23rd June 2005, nearly 2,500 temporary shelters were turned into ashes due to fire in Kargil Nagar, a makeshift colony where the people who lost their houses due to tsunami in Chennai were housed. The ethical and practical concerns of dealing with what Thomas Siebert of Medico International called a constellation of suffering remained rocky. However, documents such as the Chennai Declaration could spark more introspection, discussion, and useful insights.
I think one of the best ways to improve the quality of work to further empower communities affected by the tsunami is to focus on human resources themselves. So the human resources at the community level, community leaders, CBOs and NGOs. This needs capacity building, it needs some strategies, it doesn't just happen by itself. But with care and nurturing, I think that's the most long-lasting effect that we can achieve, towards empowerment of people. There is also need for a human resource development strategy, a training strategy to improve, capacities in health, in education, and in development related aspects for groups working with tsunami victims and for tsunami victims themselves. I think the role of affected communities in decision making regarding their own lives would help in this capacity building process.
It is essential that we look at these people not as victims, but as people who have the right to decide and design their own process of improving their situation. What is happening at the moment is that they are just treated as victims, and somebody else somewhere decides what to do. lots of money has been mobilized and lot of aid has come into various countries including Sri Lanka, and these are being utilized by the government at the moment not to provide relief and rehabilitation of the victims, but to push them out further from their coastal fishing livelihoods, and the fishing areas are being taken over to be replaced by tourism. This is because the right to decide and right to plan has been taken away from them. It's very necessary to get their participation, look at what they feel, look at what they want, and look at the ideas and proposals that they have. Now in Sri Lanka this is a heavy rainy season, and many of the people are still in temporary camps and in tents where it's impossible to live inside those tents. Now this has happened because what people are not consulted.
I would say that there are two things that are important to improve the quality of our work. One is to learn from our mistakes and also look at what we have achieved during the course of tsunami relief and rehabilitation process. And also for each area that we are involved in, there is a scientific base of knowledge that is available to us. I think we should always look at what are the best practices, what is the state of the art, and try to, as much as possible, in a culturally appropriate way, depending on the resources we have, we should try to adopt those principles into our work.
The Philippines did not experience a tsunami similar to what was experienced in India, Sri Lanka, and other parts of the world like Indonesia, but certainly we experience a lot of disasters also, such as flash floods that occur after a series of typhoons, and also landslides because of illegal logging that is happening in many of our mountains. So the effects on the poor, especially by these disasters, which are so-called natural disasters, are really quite big, because it's something that affects lives and livelihood. And we believe that these are not just natural disasters, but these are also related to man-made disasters, which are actually disrespect of nature and disrespect of the environment, but also brought about by the greed of big business, multinational corporations that are also brought about by globalization and the negative impact of this globalization.
The Chennai Declaration. Preamble. We, the participants of the post-tsunami People's Health Movement Dialogue held in Chennai from 8th to 9th April 2005, pledge to strive for a people-centered approach in the rehabilitation of affected communities that sees them not as passive beneficiaries of aid but as active participants in their own empowerment. We firmly believe that all rehabilitation work and processes should ensure equity and dignity of both the affected people and the communities they live with or amidst. We firmly believe that aid is a right and not charity. We celebrate the tremendous generosity and solidarity expressed by people the world over towards the constellation of suffering that only became visible on 26 December 2004. A series of issues of concern under categories of human rights and politics of aid, community, public health and psychosocial concerns, gender and social exclusion, rehabilitation, disaster response and development were outlined in the Chennai Declaration. The general principles outlined in the Declaration. The situation prior to the disaster should not be taken as the standard of rehabilitation efforts, and all effort should be made to achieve as high a standard of living as possible for affected communities. The local community, local self-governance institutions, and elected representatives should have a key role in relief and rehabilitation planning and implementation. The land rights of affected communities must be fiercely protected, and they must have a high degree of participation in resettlement. Relief measures as well as livelihoods, promoted as part of rehabilitation measures should be ecologically sustainable. Create decentralized disaster warning systems and should ensure community access and control. Ensure right to information of affected communities. Recognize that post-disaster situations are often used as a pretext by governments and vested interests to promote neoliberal anti-poor policies and programs, including privatization of common assets and denial of customary rights of local communities. Recognize all the affected and not only the visibly struck. The planning of relief and rehabilitation must include clear time frames. Mechanisms need to be put into place to monitor relief measures, particularly to ensure favorable programs of development for marginalized communities such as indigenous people, Dalits, ethnic and sexual minorities.